So how do we end up getting more drivers out there on the road today? Is it really a problem? We've addressed it in the past. Let's take a little bit of a deeper dive today and see what the real issue is, the real challenge, and maybe even a real solution. Welcome to JOZ Bytes. Well, hello again, everyone. This is Chris Joslin coming to you again with another edition of JOZ Bytes. Welcome to the floor. Welcome to the conversation. Welcome to iLevelLogistics.com. And we encourage people to go on there on a daily basis, see aggregated information, curated information, our weekly indicators of the industry, and see and keep abreast of the important decisions that are happening from a federal, state, and local standpoint, how it affects you as either an entrepreneur or as a member of a large company, and how the broadening of the logistics, transportation, supply chain industry is affecting the world as a whole, inside and outside of our industry. It's important to know these things. It's important to address them. It's important to get opinions and ideas, and while I don't sit here and think that I'm right about everything, most of the time I am, but I encourage you to jump on YouTube and see these videos under JOZ Bytes. Support this process, this program, and support it with your affirmation, confirmation, or dissension to these things. This provides better context and better growth for those of us in the industry that want to learn more on a regular basis. And as always, diversity of opinion is what it's all about. Everyone should have an opinion, and collectively, when we converse about these opinions, we can come to decisions that are a benefit to all of us involved. Now, recently, there's been a lot of conversation in the world today about driver shortages, whether those are true or false. For the last 20 or 30 years, that has been a narrative in the industry that has continued to pile up confirmations from broad industry levels, both from the governmental agencies, from industry leaders, etc. Because one of the things that the supply and demand curve usually looks at is, no matter the reason for the lack of supply, feeding additional dollars or capital or energy into increasing the supply of whatever's missing, in this case drivers, is the way people have gone at fixing these challenges, looking at these problems and developing a solution around them. Now, right now, the narrative, if you read up on the literature, says that there are, literally tens of thousands of drivers needed in the industry to accomplish what is needed in our supply chain right now. We won't go into to a lot of the challenges over the last couple of years that have turned into, a kind of different form of pandemic across the industry itself. But the reality is the problem is not going away. The question is why is it there? Now, we've talked about this in previous podcasts. I can't remember the name of the podcast, but if you look back probably almost a year ago, I was discussing this matter in terms of some of the things that MIT Transportation Labs has come up with and looked at as to why there are reasons around driver shortages. There's a lot of evidence that will point at the deconstruction of oversight that occurred some 30 odd years ago, and how the industry itself and these drivers are not paid enough. And I'm right there with you that the drivers should be put in the center focus. I think that's what the name of both the conversation that we had on podcasts and in an article that I developed, it was called driver centrism, if I remember correctly. If you want to look that up, you'll see some of the things I said in the past, and it's not dissimilar to what I'm talking about now. But recently I was going through a paper with OOIDA, which is the Owner Operators Independent Driver Association of America, and they are involved with, as the acronym says, owner operators, individuals or small companies that have gone out, and our industry has been a hotbed for entrepreneurialism over the course of the last 30 plus years. It's been a great place for people that want to move away from a corporate environment, something that is great for some people, something that perhaps has less stability going out on your own and developing something independently. but has its empowerment to help people control their own calendars, to develop a lifestyle, keep a lifestyle, grow a lifestyle for them and their families that is conducive to the direction they want to go as individuals. And this is a wonderful free country, and it allows us to do these kind of things in short order, and it allows us to be flexible and to go after these things. But the nature of our business and the regulation that's occurring from every level of government or environmental agencies is it affects all businesses one way or another, certainly. But in terms of the transportation logistics industry, they've been demonized forever about the pollutants that go out there. And while the truck drivers really have nothing to do with the development of the diesel engine and things like that, they are the ones behind, and they're the ones in the driver's seats. They're the ones getting out there in the roads. They're the ones that people blame for the smoke coming out of the stack. So there's an entire another conversation we can have about what I call the evolution of our industry. And we'll go down that road. But today, I just wanted to talk for just a few minutes, try to make it a little quicker than usual, about this driver shortage issue again, and actually read you some of the things that OOIDA has put together in a white paper not too long ago, because it's important to note that some of these things are flawed in the way they're discussed, if you will. And you know, the narrative, numerous media outlets in recent months have sought to cover various issues impacting the trucking industry, including the notion of this chronic and persistent driver shortage. Much of the discussion surrounding this issue stems from several statements released by the American Trucking Association, ATA, suggesting that the industry is about 80,000 drivers short currently in the system. And that driver shortage should surpass about 160,000 drivers by 2030. Now, however, though, a careful review of the facts paints a completely different picture. And this, again, is at least somewhat aligned with the way I'm thinking as well. And that picture is marked by the retention issues and at times the unattractive working environments due to large part to long hours and the inadequate compensation. So compensation is going to come up in every version of this that I can think of. And compensation has gone up dramatically over the course of the last 2 years in particular, especially when the supply is depleted. Now, there's a lot of arguments that could say that people in the transportation logistics industry, at least certain segments of that industry, have gone into the construction industry when it's booming, and they've gone. It's more of a malleable position. Well, I shouldn't say malleable. I would say there's a lot more retention missing in this industry, not just based on the industry inadequacies itself, but on outside forces that draw people away. Because ultimately, and we've talked about this in previous podcasts as well, with the great realignment or great, change in how people look at their job situations, going to different jobs and stuff. It's an economic decision, an individual or family economic decision when people take and move their situation to a new venue. Whether it's within the same industry, outside the industry, if the dollars are more and the hours are better, or the ability to stay at home versus be on the road so long, all these things compound into creating a decision tree for individuals to move from one industry to another. So back to the point at hand, if you have additional dollars being fed into that industry directly to the driver's pocket in one shape or form, either benefits or better working hours or whatever, or just simply dollars in your pocket at the end of the week, then that will help to take care of some of those deltas between the option A over here driving a truck, or option B over there and putting wallboard up, things like that. So that's something to consider to think about. But it's very high turnover rate in particular segments of the industry. Not all segments of the industry are the same. Long haul truckers, big trucking companies, they have a huge, over 90% turnover. And so let me get back into this a little bit. I won't read the whole thing, but I'll paraphrase some certain parts so that you get the idea what we're talking about. So the basic economics is there really a driver shortage? In May 2021, a gentleman named Greg Rolansky, a writer and reporter for NPR Planet Money, published an article emphasizing how basic economics can shed light on the supposed driver shortage. The following was taken directly out of this gentleman's article. The lobbying organization for the nation's big trucking employers, the American Trucking Association, ATA, again, has been making this argument since the 1980s. 1980s. Yet store shelves somehow remain stocked. In a capitalist system where you can pay people to do basically anything, how is it even possible to have a worker shortage for multiple decades? Probably not. In a 2018 study published in the Bureau of Labor Statistics, BLS, economists Stephen Burks and Kristen Monaco investigated claims by industry leaders that the trucking labor market had somehow been broken enough to create a decades-long shortage. Standard economics says if you don't have enough workers, you raise wages, and within a reasonable amount of time, presto, no more shortage. Is trucking somehow different than this? I don't think so. A thorough investigation led them to conclude that the trucking labor market is not different. It is not broken. Yes, they say the trucker labor market is tight, meaning companies are competing to fill jobs, but it functions in the same way as any other labor market. Now, this is kind of the basis of my argument along these lines. It's not that the truckers are so much different, or they're renegades, or they're this different breed of people, though there are certainly segments of it. And you can go on Instagram and some of the online Twitters and things like that, and you can see that there are some real eccentric, wonderful people out there driving the roads today. And they get our loads of goods to and from places. Otherwise, without them, you wouldn't have anything on the shelves. They are the bloodstream of the nation. They're the system in which we are able to get goods and products to and from markets, etc. Otherwise, things would be just shut down, as is noted from the Canadian situation that's occurring today, soon to be U.S. situation, soon to be cross-border Mexico situation as well, by the way. These protests are not going to go away, and they're an important segment of the United States, not just the United States, but they're an important segment of the supply chain itself. They are the strong links that allow us to do everything from A to B, or from cradle to grave, as they would say. So the ATA, as well as a lot of large trucking lobbying organizations, have claimed that there's been a driver shortage for decades. In 2000, the Truckload Carrier Association petitioned the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, the FMCSA, to lower the federal commercial driver's license age to 18. Now, this has happened locally. They cited that the driver shortage was the primary reason for the effort. In the nearly 20 years since that petition, 20 years ago, there has never been a significant disruption in the delivery of goods by truck due to lack of drivers, and hundreds of thousands of new CDLs have been issued each year. Over time, driver compensation has remained relatively stagnant, failing to increase at the rate that this reflects inflation. So there's a problem there, absolutely. Now, I think we may have challenged that problem and definitely not resolved. No problems are resolved. As you probably heard in my last JOZ Bytes, as far as the crystal ball for 2022, this problem is not going to go away anytime soon. And there are other factors that are going to compound that, including and not limited to the fact that there's still there's a direct push by the system in America that allows for litigation on almost anything to move 750,000 GL for a truck up to $2 to even $5,000, or excuse me, $5 million, $2 to $5 million. This would put many owner-operators completely out of business, and that's a conversation for another time. But that would exacerbate the problem of drivers, or it would shift drivers directly to large companies again, which is another conversation, and one of the things that I believe that the powers in charge of creating regulations have designed most of these regulations to benefit those that are of the larger, deeper pocket kind of businesses than smaller. So the authors of this BLS report concluded that the view of a long-standing shortage of drivers is puzzling considering empirical labor economics. They found that the market for truck drivers works about as well as any other blue-collar occupation, and that, broadly speaking, we should expect that if wages rise when the labor market for trucks is too tight, then the potential for long-term shortage will be ameliorated. In fact, according to the report, driver employment is actually stable. Now, this paper was developed right at the beginning of the pandemic, so there are outside circumstantial factors that have created a much more tight market for this type of service, of course. But the true issue is not driver shortage, but retention, driver retention, which is why the Secretary of Transportation, the DOT, Pete Buttigieg, hosted a roundtable back this last July 2021 on truck driver recruitment and retention. And according to the ATA's own statistics, the average annual turnover rate, and I want you to get this, the average annual turnover rate for a long-haul trucker at a big trucking company has greater than 90%, been greater than 90% for decades. That means, as an example, if a company has 10 truckers, 9 will be gone within the first year. 9. Or equivalently, 3 of their drivers' positions will have to each be refilled 3 times in a single year because so many new drivers leave within months. Now, that's partly the type of transportation that's going on. It's a longer haul, big trucking company, et cetera, et cetera. There are much higher retention levels within the LTL or dedicated business segments within the industry where there's a sameness that goes on. So if you peel that onion back a little bit, you'll see that part of it is the psychology of round tripping, the psychology of having a home base, and this world where you're gone for weeks at a time before you get back home again has changed a lot in the last decade or so. The BLS report found that the truck driver employment was associated with driver compensation and that the current supply of drivers is more than adequate to respond to the overall growth in the demand. The chart below, and I'll put this up on the screen, also helps to demonstrate that this correlation by depicting a more significant increase and decrease in the number of truck drivers in comparison to the percentage of wage increases started in April 2020. Again, the authors of this BLS report, Bureau of Labor Statistics, concluded that though the market tends to be tight, it imposes no constraints on entry or exit from this occupation. Though with the drug and alcohol enforcement protocol, that is changing, and we've talked about that, the clearinghouse, if you will. That is affecting drivers significantly, and rightly so. There's a safety thing involved there, and we've had conversations about that before. We'll have them again. But for now, there is really no reason to think that, given sufficient time, driver supply should fail to respond to the price signals that the market is handling in a way that's kind of standard. Because as wages have gone up, so have the entries into the CDL industry, into the truck driver industry. So the suggestion, of course, is that if large companies would spend more time in resources addressing the serious issues from the perspective of the driver, whatever those issues are, and I'll read off a few of them here in a second, then perhaps they might be able to improve the driver retention rate. And retaining drivers is the key to all this. So these are table comparisons between commercial drivers and motor carriers issues. So in this, I'll just give you the top 3 of each. I'll maybe do more than that, but from commercial driver standpoint, driver compensation and truck parking is a tie. And there's a lot of conversation right now about truck parking, especially with hours of service, and how that diminishes your ability to get from point A to point B without having to stop and reset or fulfill what the electronic logs require you to fulfill. So driver compensation and truck parking are a tie. Motor carriers, from the motor carrier side looking at that, they just say driver shortage, right? And then, so from the commercial driver standpoint, number 2 is detentions and delays at customer facility. And motor carriers just say that's driver shortage first, driver retention second, lawsuit abuse is third on the motor carrier side looking at that. And then from the commercial drivers, number 3 is fuel prices. And we can go into a lot of things below that, but those things, if you think about it. So driver compensation and truck parking is number 1. Detention and delay at customer facilities is number 2. And fuel prices is number 3. All of those are tremendously volatile situations. If you think about it, driver compensation is tied to completely supply and demand. When there's too many drivers, the retention is a little bit higher. They're not flipping from company to company, and there's no battle to increase either hourly wage or spot pricing wage or whatever the case may be. But truck parking is nestled right in there as a tie for number one, and a huge deal in the United States. And there's legislation that had been put out by some people from the federal level and states and local level to try to increase the amount of parking available to try to stop this bleed from occurring. Then detention and delay at customer facilities. Now this number two on the commercial drivers is what MIT Truck Labs, I think it was called. MIT Truck Labs looked at this in, I think it was 2017, and they blame most of the driver shortage on delays at either origin or destination, where the KPIs for the organization trying to take your freight off the truck would override the need for the truck driver to be on the road. So they spent so much time at these facilities that their contention, the MIT Truck Labs contention, is that 12 minutes more per day, per driver per day in the US, 12 minutes more out of an 8-hour day, 8 to 10 hour day, depending on which reset scenario you're under, would completely get rid of this truck driver shortage. Just that. So do we focus more centrally on the driver, or do you focus more centrally on the needs of the warehouse and the end consumer, for instance, that is delaying the unload load situations for these guys? So moving on from there a little bit. So employment wise, is there really a truck driver shortage? Not really. Not really at the moment. At least that's kind of my analysis of this. So in November of 2021, Quartz, a news outlet focused on global economics, noted that the assertion that the U.S. is suffering from the latest round of a 16-year, they said 16-year, but it's been a couple of decades for sure, 16-year truck driver shortage is misleading at best. Quartz also stated that the real shortage is a lack of good trucking jobs that can attract and retain workers in a tight market. So it's the broad umbrella of processes and issues and all these different things that I just mentioned that keep the driver, instead of right in the main focal point of making that position a better, more tenable position, it's those things are not being addressed, at least in the ways that the truck drivers would like to see them addressed. So according to the figures released by the FMCSA and the American Association of Motor Vehicles Administration, states that more than 450,000 new commercial driver's licenses happen each year. 450,000. DOT published in a press release in 2021 as an example that states were issuing an average of 50,000 CDLs per month during the first half of 2021. So this is not like people haven't been rushing to fill the void, especially as people have increased the pricing. But increasing the payment to drivers is not enough. That's the kind of what this whole thing is being discussed about. The figure was 14% higher than the monthly average in 2019 and 60% higher than 2020, which is expected, of course, when people were shut down and out of jobs completely because of the pandemic. Moreover, FMCSA granted operating authority to 92,000 motor carriers in the first 6 months of 2021. So when we say 92,000 motor carriers, we mean from one truck and up. Okay, that motor carrier sounds like this big company that was established. No, not necessarily. Could be, not necessarily though. But they were given authority to go out and sell their wares, sell their service to others as a motor carrier in the United States of America. 92,000. Some of that has to do with changes regionally. If you're out here in California on the West Coast like I am, then there are regulations coming at you all the time that change the dynamics of who gets into the business, who gets out, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I don't have statistics of how many went out of business at the same time, but that would be a nice thing to look at. But that's an 88% increase over the same time period in 2020 and 60% more than the same in 2019. This is further supported by the BTS statistics released concerning the unemployment rate for a truck industry, as shown in this chart coming across your screen. All of these figures, in combination with the ATA's turnover statistics, clearly indicate a driver surplus, not a shortage, a surplus. So you have to ask yourself why that is. So are there retention issues? Yeah. Are there enough drivers out there? It seems like it. So something else is occurring that isn't thought of a lot. And now I could get into some real weeds here, and I'll leave this kind of thought process for you, but it really has to do with time. So the efficiency of what you do drives the outcomes of what you do in anything that you do. So if you're a truck driver and you're able to get that 12 minutes more in per day on the highway than you did without some of the restrictions that we labeled earlier, 1, 2, and 3, which was the commercial truck drivers' top 3 categories. In other words, is there enough parking for you to actually get the rest you need to deliver on time in the areas you need to? Is your pay adequate to the time you're spending away from your family? And is the insurance rates, as we talked about, going to allow you to overcome their premiums with the money that you're making? And is this something that you can actually do within the construct of the hours of service that are required by the federal government now, and the ELDs that are required to be in every truck today? So the industry perspective, we probably have more drivers than we did before the pandemic. So I kind of agree with at least some of this assessment. I think there's some deeper issues involved, but just to give you a quote from one of the stakeholders that kind of agrees with this as well is J.B. Hunt, Senior Vice President of Corporate Safety and Security and a driver personnel, Greer Woodruff, said the driver issue always comes down to relative to supply and demand, and it's always seeking equilibrium, as all job descriptions do, all jobs do. They seek an equilibrium. As long as there's a demand that outpaces supply, then there's associated costs to the supply chain. He happens to believe that there are plenty of drivers. We just don't use them very well, which goes back to what I said before. It's about efficiency. If you have a giant pool of drivers and you're able to get them on the street for just a little bit longer, then you solve the problem. Load and unload times, as I mentioned earlier, are really important to this. The inefficiencies or problems of the supply chain are due to excessive detention. That's, again, one of my main contentions. The inefficiency with which the supply chain faces today is not lack of drivers, but is because of increased detention time. Detention time. Something that has been an ongoing bane of the supply chain existence forever, because there are opposing processes and indicators and levels of importance that the stakeholders in a supply chain from cradle to grave have. And oftentimes I think the industry looks at the stakeholders at the front end or the back end of that supply chain as the most important stakeholders. And they forget that, in my view, the most important stakeholder, period, is the one that's actually moving your product for you. So if the focus was re-centralized around the prospect of making this job description, this industry, a better place to be for these professionals, then a lot of this would go away. Detention time, or in particular the period that a driver is not paid while he or she sits to be loaded or unloaded, is an issue of primary concern in the trucking industry. In a recent survey conducted by OFI, this is the insurance side of the owner-operator stuff, over 900 respondents expressed their professional opinions and experiences with detention, many of whom felt the detention time not only impacted their financial livelihood, but it also negatively impacted safety on the roads. As one member stated, this is the biggest issue affecting hours of service and safety. Drivers encountering unexpected long detention, feeling forced to drive faster, harder, and longer to make up for perceived loss. And it's not just a perceived loss, it is a loss. If you spend an extra hour at an origin and destination and you're trying to get your calendar aligned with what your dispatch or what the tenders are coming your way, then you can see people avoiding downtime or speeding up through the time they're on the roads to try to get to the next thing to make up for those differences. Anything that is transporting people, cargo, etc., is under the same gun. Anybody that's been on a commercial airline anytime in the last few years knows that if there's a delay in either getting out of the gate or before the gate, and the schedules always have some buffers built into them, as the schedules do for these folks. But they'll say, oh, we're going to speed up, we're going to make up some time going over the Rocky Mountains or something like that. Well, how do you think they do that? They change the route slightly. They take a course that's slightly more advantageous to make up the difference of the time. Well, anytime something like that happens in any kind of business that provides a transportation service, something is going to be deprioritized to prioritize making up for that time. And with hours of service and with electronic logs, you're not really able to do that so effectively anymore. You don't have the ability to simply not log that stop or do anything like that. So depending on a motor carrier type of operation, a driver may drive up to either 60 hours in 7 days or 70 hours in 8 days. Those are kind of the way things go right now. Every moment a shipper or receiver holds up a driver at the dock waiting to load or unload can wreak havoc on their hours of service and their entire schedule for the future loads, as we just mentioned with the example. According to the survey results, a majority of both those who operate under the 67 rule or the 78 rule spend between 12 and 20 hours each week, waiting to load or unload their truck. In other words, those complying with the 60-hour rule spend approximately 20 to 33%, 1/5 to 1/3 of their time of possible compensated drive time in some form of detention, while those complying with the 70-hour rule spend about 17 to 29% of their drive time. This is just totally unacceptable. Anyone wanting to increase the efficiency of the overall supply chain must first begin with this problem. This is the problem. It's not just throwing money or more bodies or 18-year-olds that can't barely drive the Honda Civic into a CDL kind of situation. I'm not against if you go through a pilot program, which is what I like to call it, a mentorship program, and you have enough hours under your belt and you're a conscientious driver of 18, 19, 20 years old, then we have to do that. And as AI develops better technologies for guiding these huge rigs with 80,000 pounds total going down the highway, then having a pilot with less experience, an under 21-year-old like that, is a smart step to increase the overall labor pool. But that's not where we should start. We should start with this. We should start with looking at these components that are affecting the entire supply chain in the way we are. So, I know recently FreightWaves interviewed multiple company executives from trucking companies servicing the ports in California, which are, of course, a mess, as we all know, who dispute the driver shortage idea, saying they are actually shedding drivers because of the lack of consistent work due to all the congestion. In other words, I've got a bunch of drivers, but it takes so long to get in and out of the port, and there's so many restrictions, and they have to be clean trucks, and they have to, in the next few years, they're going to have to be zero emission trucks and things like that, that they're losing drivers to people that can actually get in and out of ports or do something differently. It's just the fact. Sometimes, if there's a 4 to 6 hour wait to pull something out of a truck each day, you can't get a whole lot of business done. And that drives things more to an hourly wage type of situation than a per trip kind of costing model. So I believe, as I said a moment ago, that the wrong solution is this under 21 policy. Large carriers have been pushing the CDL driver rate from 21 to 18, and there's a lot of people that look at that and say, maybe that's the reason why they want to move the insurance rates from 750,000 GL up to 2 to 5 million, because now we're adding a component that statistically over time, if the younger crowd, the less involved crowd, the less experienced drivers are going to happen to have, they're just going to have more associative accidents and thus litigation than you would in the past. So they need to compensate for that. And of course, if the real driver, which is never the real driver, but if the real driver is really purely safety, you wouldn't be thinking about this at all. You'd be fixing some of the other issues involved. So, the different solution, instead of adding young drivers, would be to note that the overall industry is averaging between 6.4, 6.5 hours of actual driving time out of a possible 11-hour day. If you could move that needle just a little bit, maybe up to 8.5, something like that, that's around a 30% increase in capacity, virtual capacity, as I like to put it, without adding a single driver or truck. Maybe some M&R perhaps is added, but without adding a single, let me say that again. Moving from 6.5 to say 8+ is a 30% increase in virtual capacity. That means ability for trucks, drivers, and assumingly trailers, etc., to start hauling freight in an industry that says it's been short on drivers for 20+ years. It's over 1,000 drivers and trucks that would be available to the supply chain if we could just find out how to harness that. So I don't have all the answers here. I encourage folks to, comment on all this. Give me your feedback on this. I am not opposed to pilot programs. I'm not opposed to HOS. I'm not opposed to ELDs. I'm not opposed to any of that. What I'm opposed to is focusing on regulation that does not address the real underlying issues of a supply chain crunch that's going on and has been going on for a very long time. My underlying opinion is this is a falsified anxiety point that is generated specifically to try to continue to get more regulation and agendas across that don't have the driver as the central focus of this process. It has other issues outside of that. People will say it's the common good of the society and all this kind of stuff. Well, okay, I agree that we don't want dirty air. I agree that we want less noise. I agree that we want, viable systems that allow more people to operate within this industry. But I also agree that you should be able to walk into a store and get what you want, and that it's not gone from the shelves, and that we've got a process in place, a robust, can be fragile system that's in place, but adaptable. And it's adaptable because we always focus on solving the actual issue instead of applying something else that will exacerbate the issue. That's my take for the day. As always, I think I'm right, but tell me I'm not. That I encourage all the time. Come to www, I don't know why I say that, but come to iLevelLogistics.com. Give us your comments. Read up on our industry indicators. See our Road Scholar articles. See other podcasts that have occurred, both short and long form. And be a part of the community. This is one of a million different subjects that are very important to the industry as a whole and should be things that we think about. Because the more heads involved in thinking about these processes, the more we can change, the more we can adapt. We don't want to burn the process to the ground. I think that's a false narrative that a lot of people like to just completely reverse course or change direction, change on a dime, those kind of, no. When you have a large ship, you need to change and course correct a little at a time. But to course correct, that means you have to know where you're going. And if we don't know where we're going, then you just slap Band-Aids on everything, think we're making the actual transportation segment better as you go, without solving the idea of getting ourselves to the goal. And the goal is to have an effective, safe, wonderful industry for those outside in society as a whole to reap the benefits, but those inside the industry to be important within it and stand out as integral to managing it the way it should be. Thanks so much, and we'll see you again next time on JOZ Bytes.